Hey there everybody, it's Eternal Snowman and I'm here for another team building guide, and this will be part 4, which will deal mostly with balance. And the Pokemon that I'm going to be building around will be Mega Mewtwo X, specifically this defensive kind of stall breaker variant. I wouldn't say it's a stall breaker, but more of a balance breaker. However, it uses a typical, what you would call a quote-unquote stall breaker set. And it typically does very well. I've done a lot of testing with this, and I wanted to build around this for the current generation because I haven't used this mod in quite a while. I actually used it a lot during my first seasonal run, and which was very successful, and it won me quite a few battles because it's able to just bulk through just so many of the hits. It's extremely bulky and it's extremely fast. So it's able to pull off those fast recovers, and Psychic Fighting is an okay defensive typing, not amazing, but it's okay, it's good enough. And I wanted to come back to this set and build around it. So the EVs, real quick, are this. It's pretty much to outspeed Marshadow so that it gets the Wisp. Even though you can't hurt it, it does get the Wisp on it, which is important. So like all the other videos, I'm going to be going through what is balance, what balance needs, and then building a team and explaining why it works. And then at the very end of the video, I'll also talk a little bit about bulky offense, which is kind of related to balance and how they're different, but and how bulky offense succeeds. And then that will be it. And the team will be in the description below after I finish building it. And yeah, so what is balance? How does it succeed? When is it successful? And that kind of stuff. So balance is essentially a mix of both playstyles I've mentioned before between hyper offense and stall. So it's like it takes the defensive cores and offensive cores and then puts them together and kind of has a mix of everything. So you normally in a balanced team would have like a Stealth Rock setter, a Defogger, or some sort of hazard control like Rapid Spin, and then a defensive core of 2 or 3 mons, and then an offensive core of maybe, the defensive core of 2 or 3 mons, and an offensive core of 2 or 3 mons, and then like a Scarfer. You may have counted 8 mons, however, each one can fulfill different roles. So, for example, you can have one part of the offensive core be the Stealth Rock setter, or one part of that defensive core be the Stealth Rock setter or Defogger or whatever. So normally you would have like 2 or 3 mons that have offensive synergy, 2 or 3 mons that have defensive synergy, and then like a Scarfer or some sort of glue for both parts to come together. And so how you build a balanced team pretty much relies on you having reliable defensive switch-ins to all the metagame threats, but also enough offensive pressure to deal with other Pokemon that are like stall, or be able to deal with a lot of the other balanced teams that are running these defensive cores as well. So balance is normally the most common playstyle and what you would normally think of when it comes to a tier or Pokemon, or just in general, because you want to have just like a balanced core of like different Pokemon and that do different jobs. And this is what you would normally think of in an RPG or just in general when you're looking at competitive strategy games. And it's often is the most influential playstyle during a whatever in a metagame for the most part. And there are exceptions to this, and normally it just means that either the metagame is in a bad place or balance specifically is in a bad place because the tier has too many defensive Pokemon or too many offensive Pokemon for it to really shine. However, in well-balanced metagames, balance is normally the optimal choice. Not necessarily optimal, but it's the most popular choice because you're able to outplay, and they generally don't rely as much on matchup as the other playstyles. So, when you're looking at balance, you want a defensive core, an offensive core. So you want to make sure you have offensive pressure, you want to make sure you have defensive reliability, and then you also want to make sure you have hazards, so either stealth rocks, or like always stealth rocks and defog, and then or Stealth Rocks, and then Hazard Control, so Defog or Rapid Spin, and then the last one you can run either a form of spikes. It's possible. However, these hazard setters, excuse me, sorry. These hazard setters on balance normally, unlike the ones on hyper offense, will want to switch in repeatedly, so you will have rocks up on a reliable basis. So unlike hyper offense, where you want a stealth rock setter that is able to reliably get up rocks at the beginning of the game, you want a stealth rock setter rather on balance that is able to get it up consistently throughout the game. So most of the time your stealth rock setter will be a defensive setter. Offensive stealth rock setters normally define the playstyle of offense or hyper offense. Hyper offense normally has suicide leads. Offense will then have offensive stealth rockers, and sometimes also bulky offense has offensive stealth rockers, or somewhat offensive stealth rockers like Dialga and Ubers, for example. I wouldn't say it's an offensive stealth rocker because it doesn't really hit hard enough to be able to be considered an offensive stealth rocker. However, and you use it mostly because of its defensive merits, in fact. But I also wouldn't consider it a defensive rock setter because it doesn't have reliable recovery, and it doesn't come in on a huge portion of the meta. So I would consider it like a semi-offensive stealth rocker. So, and then you want to have some sort of hazard control for the most part. Sometimes you can skip on it, but in general, just make it a good habit to try to include hazard control, and then have some sort of offensive pressure. And obviously, or not obviously, but the very last point is that you must have some form of speed control on balance. Balance oftentimes will, the difference between bulky offense and balance, one of the big differences is relying on speed control. So balance, generally you will need to have scarfers or multiple priority users, or some sort of way of getting that speed boost to revenge kill certain threats, because oftentimes some mons may set up on specific threats, on specific defensive mons, because you are unable to threaten them. So you need to have some sort of speed control to have a fallback on. Ubers, generally you will be using Scarf Xerneas as your main Scarfer. There are other ones as well, such as Yveltal and Zekrom and that kind of stuff, but they're less common and less good than Xerneas. But you can have other forms of speed control. For example, you can use priority in forms of like Life Orb Rayquaza, or in other tiers like OU, you can use Lopunny as your form of speed control. In a sense. However, relying on priority as your only form of speed control can often not be successful. And then balance, also depending on the tier, you may have different wants. So for example, Z moves are quite useful on balance. So anything other than stall, you would generally want a Z move on. And then megas are generally quite useful on balance as well. Unlike offense and stall, where you can skip megas generally, well, in Ubers it's not the case. In Ubers on stall, you pretty much want a mega because it's very good, and but on offense you can skip megas because they aren't that good. There are not that many offensive megas that are very good. Balance, you tend to want them because they can fulfill many roles and they can do a lot for your team. So let's get into this team specifically. What does Mega Mewtwo X provide? This would be considered what I would consider a defensive mon, and it would be in part of a defensive core. And after its megas, it's able to provide a switcher into defensive Primal Groudon, most notably, as well as some other useful Pokemon such as Arceus Normal, Arceus-Ground, and generally defensive Pokemon that fear Taunt. It's also able to spread status notably, and offensively pressure a good portion of the metagame. It also deals with stuff like Mega Lucario very reliably. And it's also able to spread status, I already said that, but it's able to spread status and threaten mons to make sure they don't set up. or just freely do stuff like Defog or whatever. Notably, though, it doesn't provide as much offensive pressure because you're not invested to attack with this specific set, and also Mono Fighting Stab does have a lot of drawbacks in the sense that it's resisted and immune by a good portion of the metagame, such as Mega Rayquaza, not Mega Rayquaza, Mega Salamence, Rayquaza, Xerneas, the Giratina forms, as well as Lunala and Dawn Wings and Mega Gengar and Marshadow. So while those mons aren't affected at all, there are other mons that take a lot from it. For example, Yveltal, and it threatens both Zygarde, Primal Groudon, and those ground types like Arceus-Ground as well. Lucario and Primal Kyogre also are threatened heavily by this. So there's goods and bads to having Mono Fighting Stab. So what are the weaknesses of Mewtwo? It is unable to deal with fairy types well, so we need a fairy check. It needs a switch into Yveltal, because you don't want to keep it in because it doesn't win 1v1 due to Oblivion Wing. It needs hazard control to some extent, and it needs some way of dealing with flying types like Arceus, or not Arceus, well, yes, Arceus flying, as well as Rayquaza, Salamence, Ho, and Lugia. So we can start off by adding a check to all of those Pokemon, or not really check, but some way of pressuring them, which will be Stealth Rocks in the form of Primal Groudon. Primal Groudon is always a good starting point because it provides a lot to your team. It's able to threaten a lot of defensive cores, even the Spadef set, because it threatens the potential of an offensive set. It's also a reliable Stealth Rock setter. I mentioned before you want defensive Stealth Rock setters on your teams. While offensive Primal Groudon does decent on balance, it's not amazing. You'd almost always rather have Spadef on because it also deals with Xerneas. And notably, you need to be able to deal with all the metagame threats, so Xerneas is one of them. Primal Groudon would check off one of the Xerneas checks. So in general, how I would consider it to be on any team is that you should have at least 2 Xerneas checks. If it's on offense, you must have 1 Fairy Resist and Speed Control. On balance, you need to have at least 2 Fairy Resists and either a 3rd Fairy Resist or some way to heavily pressure Xerneas, or one of those Fairy Resists being so oppressive that Xerneas won't be able to do anything that game. For example, like Magearna or something. That's fine for Xerneas weakness, but Magearna, I believe, is a mediocre Pokemon in balance at best because it is a lack of pressure on a slot. So we can just go ahead and add in Primal Groudon set. We'll go ahead and just go with the standard Spadef set with Overheat for now. And it's just generally good. But this does make us weak to a couple mons. Most notably, Mega Salamence and Rayquaza are very, very good against our team right now because we're unable to really pressure them with either Pokemon. So a good next Pokemon, which will also give us hazard control, will be Arceus-Ground. And you may notice in a lot of my teams, or just a lot of teams in general, Primal Ground and Arceus-Ground form a very strong core. And why is that? Why do people do that? Why aren't these 2 Pokemon paired together so much? One is because the double ground allows you to be very good against a very good portion of the meta. This provides a very, very solid defensive backbone against pretty much everything, as between the 2 of them, they at least check pretty much every Pokemon in the metagame, with exceptions that specifically are targeted towards beating them, and generally give you a good starting point for a lot of teams, or just defensive backbone. And they're good in the sense that they are able to just deal with both the Stealth Rocks and Defog Defog parts of the team. So let's just go with the standard Judgment, Ice Beam, Recover, Defog set with 64 and 68, sorry, 192, and that is to deal with Mega Lucario better, even though this team isn't especially weak to Mega Lucario just off the bat. So what are we still missing? We need some way of dealing with Arceus, or sorry, not Arceus, Primal Kyogre. And that is either offensively or defensively. Primal Groudon provides a soft check as well, but we also need some way of dealing with Xerneas again. So a good answer to both of those would be adding a defensive Primal Kyogre. As there is actually, let me think. So defensive Primal Kyogre is an option because you're able to deal with both soft check the non-Thunder variants, and the Thunder variants are more weak to Groudon, or you can use another mon and then Primal Kyogre is also able to soft check Xerneas. So yeah, Fizdef, Primal Kyogre will be the next member. And then we'll want Xerneas. Let's just add in the members before we fill in the sets. We want Xerneas here because we want I'm thinking actually. I'm not sure 100% that I want Primal Kyogre here, because then we're lacking ways of pressuring Xerneas specifically. Because we also want the remainder of our mons to be a good defensive core. Good offensive core. Okay, actually. So what we want here is a Necrozma-Dusk-Mane, actually. So this fulfills our need for a Z move and also a way of dealing with Xerneas. It's the offensive check to the Xerneas. Groudon is the defensive check to the Xerneas. The offensive one is good because then you're able to offensively pressure after forcing it out. The defensive one is good because it's more reliable and doesn't need as much switch in. Xerneas will be our speed control Scarfer. And then we need some way of dealing with, and also it deals with Yveltal relatively decently, which is good. So between all of those, what weakness do we have? We don't really have a ground type answer right now. We don't have, we could do with another Yveltal answer. We could do with another Marshadow answer. And what are we failing to break right now? Potentially Zygarde might be potentially threatening. Arceus-Ground, kind of. Alright, so I think a good answer here is Yveltal. So, why did I choose Yveltal and Dusk-Mane? Well, okay, Xerneas should be relatively obvious here. I told you that it's generally a good Scarfer. I just like to add it in general because it gives you offensive pressure in one slot as well as speed control, as well as aromatherapy, which improves your balance, your matchup versus stall specifically. And then the other slots here are chosen. Okay, so why did I choose Necrozma? So it provides a fairy resist, and B, offensive pressure. Like I said before, an important part about offensive teams here, the balanced teams, is the offensive pressure. So here you can see here that we have a defensive core. You can consider this either 2 or 3 mons. The Mega Mewtwo doesn't necessarily have to be considered part of it. The offensive core of these two, a Scarfer, and then a Gloomon. Or this could also be part of the defensive core. And so this kind of represents a balanced team. So Necrozma gives us the Z move, it gives us offensive pressure, and also it's a fairy resist. So all your offensive mons also should provide some form of defensive benefits as well. So Yveltal here is a dark resist as well as a ground immunity, which is important. Even though Arceus-Ground generally can deal with most of the ground mons very well, it's also Yveltal is very good because it's able to then immune some of those moves, which can be useful in many scenarios. So let's fill in the sets. You want the Solganium Z, and it's chosen here over Ultra Necrozma. You want the Dusk-Mane base form for sure because you need the fairy resist, but why is this chosen over using Ultra Necrozma in the end? Because the Ultra Necrozma set after you Mega Evolve would mean this team would be insanely weak to Scarf Zern, and that would be very bad because it's one of the best Pokemon in the metagame and a very common set on many teams because of how many roles it's able to fill at the same time. So we're just going to go with the classic Double Dance build here, and the spread is this with the Adamant spread just for more breaking power. Xerneas, we will choose to use we'll choose to use Thunder here because we are somewhat weak to Ho-Oh. Actually, our Ho-Oh weakness is relatively big because we have Arceus-Ground and Necrozma, both of which are wall-based defensive. Pedon can only hit it with really toxic. Mewtwo can only really hit it with low kick. So the primary answer might be Yveltal. That's actually worth considering changing to Stone Edge on Primal Groudon specifically for that, and I will do that. We are a little bit weaker to Arceus-Ground because of that, but that's fine. We have Mewtwo and we have Yveltal. Arceus Fairy is dealt with mostly by Necrozma, so that's not a huge deal. Actually, yeah, so originally I wanted to build around Wisp, but the way this team turned out, it's better to use Toxic because you want to hit the Ho-Oh on the switch, you want to hit the Giratinas on the switch also because the only check really is Xerneas, and then you also want to hit other Pokemon on the switch like the, or not necessarily even the switch, the Arceus forms, just on the one-on-one. So then you want Aroma and Defog as the last two. These are just general fallbacks, even though we already have a consistent Defogger. The Scarf Defog allows you to have a fallback for cases like webs or T-spikes or something like that. And then Yveltal, let's pull out the Black Glasses set, which is very, very consistent. Also, it improves our matchup versus Ho-Oh. Specifically, we want Knockoff to deal with Ho-Oh well. And you'll notice that, the problem is that dropping the Wisp means that we are much more weak to Dusk-Mane. Let us check Dusk-Mane and Mewtwo. Low kick is going to be doing around 50, so that's actually good enough. I think we won't have too many problems with Dusk-Mane with this Mewtwo set because you're able to take a Z move. If we adjust for Adamant, we are able to take the Sunsteel Strike with 48 and 44. Sunsteel Strike relatively well. Is at least forced to burn the Z move if we come in on an Automize or something. So that's fine. We can at least, it's like a very, very soft check to it. Yveltal, Dark Pulse, U-Turn, and Taunt. I pass Oblivion Wing most of the time because I feel it's not always necessary. And then we'll insert our own spread here. 20 minus 252 plus. And yes. So what does this team accomplish? What is it good for? Why? Like, how did it turn out? We already really talked about how it turned out in comparison to what the previous part is, but we can talk about its win condition and what it's trying to accomplish, and why this team may be successful, why it wouldn't be successful or whatever, and what matchups it's good in and what matchups it's bad in. So notably, I told you before that Ho-Oh may be a potentially bad matchup here because you don't really have much to threaten it. The Yveltal will be big, and also the Mega Mewtwo Toxic will probably be very important. Dusk-Mane could be a potential issue if it sets up on Scarf Zern, for example. And that would force either Yveltal or either an Yveltal or a Mega Mewtwo sack, because one of them won't be able to deal with it. However, Primal Groudon can soft check it. Actually, now that I am doing this, I will be using a Brave set. This is important because just the Adamant will allow, or like just the plus attack will allow you to actually OHKO Ho-Oh. Actually, is it important here to use Overheat over Toxic? So I'm considering potentially dropping Overheat for Toxic because, yeah, let's do that. I think Toxic is better. So we are a little bit weaker to Yveltal and Co. But okay, that's fine. I'd say that this is the more optimal spread, or not more optimal spread, but more optimal way of more optimal set. And so what this team is trying to accomplish is normally getting some status off on important mons, having your offensive core break, and then eventually setting up for a Necrozma or Xerneas late game sweep, in which you are able to get them in for free in some way, or virtually for free, and start either firing off Moonblast with Xerneas, or in Necrozma's case, being able to set up by Weakening. And then early game will be mostly about setting up and preventing enemy hazards from going up, while Mewtwo pressures with low kick and taunt, while the Yveltal breaks specific threats and threatens their team. And then the late game will be mostly composed of Necrozma. So Necrozma and Xerneas together. So I'm pretty happy with this balanced team in general. I know it kind of just looks like I threw on a bunch of threats because like all these Pokemon are like top 5 in the tier outside of Mewtwo. However, a lot of what goes into team building is recognizing synergies, and a big portion of why a lot of these Pokemon are top tier are because they have synergies with each other. But yeah, you like knowing these synergies and then like how they work together and that kind of stuff is very important. So like, for example, knowing why you choose these moves. A lot of the reason why these Pokemon work very well together is because the Mega Mewtwo glue is there and it deals with a lot of these threats. Like, for example, all the support Arceus forms are unable to threaten Mega Mewtwo, and in return, Mega Mewtwo will threaten them a lot between its Toxic, its Low Kick, its Taunt, and it also has limited switch-ins, because most of its switch-ins are punished heavily by Toxic. So, yeah. So, shoot, sorry. We'll talk a little bit, now that we're finished, about bulky offense. So bulky offense is a more stall-y playstyle, more stall-like playstyle than balance in Ubers. In other tiers, it can be more offensive. But it generally consists of a lot of strong attackers that use their bulk and strength to be able to threaten and essentially 1v1 a lot of the offensive, or a lot of the mons on the enemy team. And generally they don't consist of any specific defensive cores. Rather, their entire team is like has has kind of a defensive, just like switch-ins to each other, and they have very good offensive synergy. So the defensive core, it's not like 2 mons that are defensive and 2 mons that are offensive, but rather all of them are bulky. So they're strong and they're bulky and they're offensive. And in this situation is when you often see the bulkier offensive hazard setters, such as like Arceus Fairy with Recover, or SD Primal Groudon or Chinese Dawn with the Eruption Rock Tomb sets that pop up, that are able to consistently set up rocks and then have the more offensive Pokemon kind of threaten the defoggers to try to prevent them from getting down the hazards. It sort of has a more it plays a lot more like offense than it does balance. However, it is not really like offense because you are really utilizing defensive switch-ins with all of your offensive mons. So yeah, the win con for that is kind of just like slowly breaking their team down and kind of kill their team before they kill your team. Which, I mean, obviously that's the objective in every game, but in like for balance, you often want to win with your win conditions, which like are your setup mons normally, or some sort of offensive breaker. On offense, bulky offense, you often just want to go tit for tat or just trade hits and that kind of stuff, and kind of just make sure you kill all of their Pokemon just by hitting them hard or setting up and trying to hit them hard or whatever. So thank you guys for watching. I'll leave this team in the description below, and have fun with that. And I hope you guys enjoyed. And this will be the last part of my team building guide. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I had a lot of fun making this, so I hope you guys had a lot of fun watching it. And that's it. Bye-bye.